This is an unabridged reading of Beyond the War of Thorns, Chapter 2, Part 1. The hot and largely barren lands of Durotar had been home to the orcs for several generations now. Covered in red, rocky soil, this territory was bordered by the Great Sea to the east and south, the South Fury River to the west, and the mystical lands of Ashara to the north. In addition to many canyons and hills, Durotar also housed Orgrimmar, the Horde's capital city, a horde that was now in turmoil, as enemies threatened it from the outside and from within. It had been several weeks since the Fourth War between the Horde and Alliance was started, thanks to Sylvanas Windrunner and her followers committing one of the most devastating atrocities Azeroth had ever seen. Since then, war had raged across the globe, spreading throughout Kalimdor, the Eastern Kingdoms, and also reaching the shores of the nations of Zandalar and Kul Tiras. During this time, another war had also been waged in the shadows. Given that many had defected from Sylvanas' Dark Horde, the Banshee Queen assigned the task of hunting down all such rebels to Dagon Dreadblade. The assassin had since then ravaged the ranks of all those Horde that would abandon his warchief. Curses! If I don't stop Dagon soon, there won't be anyone left willing to stand up for the real Horde, thought Iron Ghost as he surveyed the streets of Orgrimmar from Grommash Hold's rooftop. The Orc had spent the last few weeks attempting to track down the Forsaken Assassin. The Horde that upheld the values established by Thrall long ago, those of honor and courage, stood on the precipice of oblivion, and Iron Ghost knew it. Up until now, though, Iron Ghost had only been able to find the remains of the many victims cut down at the hands of Dagon Dreadblade. The undead rogue had remained elusive as he continued his bloody campaign. The sun was now setting, and the moonlight would soon blanket the streets of Orgrimmar, which meant all manner of scoundrels and cutthroats would then emerge from their shadowy dens. This would provide a great opportunity to gather the information Iron Ghost was looking for. "Where are you hiding, you blasted corpse?" whispered the orc under his breath as he jumped from roof to roof in the Horde's capital city, making his way from the Valley of Strength to the Drag. If my contacts aren't playing me for a fool, thought Iron Ghost, then Dagon should be back in Kalimdor by now. First Kel'Thalas, then Zandalar, and then Kul Tiras. I always seem to be one step behind Dagon. I think next time I'll take a more aggressive approach with the rat feeding me my leads, and make sure he's not just sending me on wild goose chases. "Yes, I heard it's a whole group of them," said a voice in a hushed tone as Iron Ghost reached the cleft of shadow. Three dark figures were sitting in a dimly lit corner, drinking grog, playing a game of craps, and gossiping. The perfect scenario to obtain valuable information. "Let's see if these drunks have anything good to say," thought Iron Ghost as he quickly ducked behind some nearby barrels and crates. "A whole group?" asked another voice. "The boss sure ain't gonna like that. I wouldn't want to be him when he catches up." "Boss," thought Iron Ghost. "Who might they be talking about, I wonder?" "I agree," said the first voice as he shook the pair of dice in his hand and rolled them on the dusty floor. "And I hear he's really close to finding them. They were last seen in the Southern Barrens, heading into Dustwallow Marsh."
"Snake Eyes, you lose!"
celebrated the third figure as he scooped up the small pile of coins, much to the chagrin of the first individual. "Dustwallow Marsh. I hope I can finally catch a lucky break," thought Iron Ghost as he slowly backed away from the three, ensuring that he wasn't noticed. "Catching Dagon out in the field sounds almost too good to be true, but this lead is all I've got for now." The orc then sprinted and swung through the city as he headed towards the Orgrimmar stables. Once there, his giant black riding wolf began to lick Iron Ghost's face as a show of affection, clearly having missed his master. "Easy, boy," chuckled the orc. The dark wolf was very imposing, and as Iron Ghost quickly placed armor pieces adorned with red plates and miniature spikes along its body, including a spike collar and a metallic face cover, its appearance became quite terrifying. "It's going to be a difficult ride," thought the rogue as he mounted the powerful large wolf, "but flying there would be too dangerous. Sylvanas is closely monitoring all flights within Horde territory, and I wouldn't want to blow my cover if Dreadblade is really there. "Are you ready, old boy?" asked Iron Ghost of his wolf as he gently patted the beast's mane. "We have one day to make this count," he added, and with one final shout, the black beast sprinted out of the Orgrimmar stables. The pair swiftly maneuvered through the Dark City roads, and within minutes they were riding south at top speeds near the banks of the South Fury River. The grey skyline served as an appropriate backdrop to the emotions experienced by the passengers of the Alliance ship as it sailed within view of the charred remains of the World Tree. Weeks ago, Teldrassil had been engulfed in Azerite-infused flames, burning to the ground and taking with it the lives of countless Kalderae in one of the most horrifying genocides Azeroth had ever seen. Justice had been delayed as Anduin Wrynn, the High King of the Alliance, was unwilling to commit the necessary forces to retake the Night Elf lands and to expel the horde scoundrels that now occupied them. Justice, however, had finally arrived. They'll pay, thought Draydara Wildhunt as a tear ran down her cheek while she examined the remains of her childhood home through the vessel's porthole. The Night Elf wore traditional Calderae war attire, as her head was protected by a maroon-colored, glaive-like leather covering, from which 2 small blades protruded to the sides. Her shoulders, chest, hips, hands, and feet were also covered by maroon-colored garments, from which metallic blades twisted in spiral, ending in more blade edges protecting her body. Additionally, vibrant purple feathers extended from her spaulders and her anklets, highlighting that Draydara's beauty was equally matched by her ferocity. Despite this, the sight of the destruction inflicted on her homelands was overwhelming, and she felt her spirit crumbling as she was near to breaking down in tears. She quickly regained her composure though, remembering that she had determined that the time to weep was over. It was time to reclaim the debt that the Horde owed her people.
If only I had been there to defend our home,
said a burly, bearded Night Elf standing next to Draydara as he gritted his teeth, and the rage was palpable in his intense gaze. Do not dwell on the past, Jaffron, responded Draydara as she turned to look at her fellow Calderae. Elune willing, we will get back our home, she continued, one way or another. Jaffron Alphastar nodded in agreement. From under his brown, bare pelt head cover, the rest of his muscular body was adorned in similar brown fur pieces, held together by dark green leather bands and lined with sharp, ruined claws and fangs. This is beyond what I could have imagined, brother, said another taller Calderae standing behind Jaffron and Draydara as he removed his bow-like helm, from which 2 branches protruded and looped around the back of the head, giving the appearance of curved antlers. Gyarados Alphastar's long blue hair fell and rested on his shoulders as he steadied himself when gazing at Teldrassil's remains. Jaffron's older brother was covered in more brown branches and vines, which in turn were adorned with auburn and dark blue leaves. The wood-like parts of his armor created the shapes of claws on the Calderae's hands and feet and of small wings on his back. Additionally, his blue eyes glowed with power as he looked through the porthole. A couple of paces from the 3 stood another Night Elf, looking out through a different porthole. Kalindra Swiftwing had been less successful in maintaining her composure as she quietly wept under her green and brown hood, tears pouring down her face. The Calderae Huntress was normally full of life and optimism, but right now, her only comfort was the pale warden owl perched by her side, whom she gently caressed. The rest of the ship's occupants remained solemn and silent as the Alliance vessel moved past Teldrassil's remains and continued on its way to its destination. Only the creaking of the giant wooden ship and the light breeze moving over the waves outside could be heard. As the World Tree disappeared from view, however, the multitude of soldiers on board resumed their preparations for war. The heavily armored warrior named Yolof Stonecore continued to sharpen his massive greatsword. Over the last few weeks, the dwarf had seen many battles across Azeroth and more bloodshed than most could stomach. He, however, remained stoic in the face of such violence and embraced the chaos.
It's ready,
thought Yolof as he put the finishing touches on his blade and stood up, prepared for what was to come. After strapping the great sword to his back, he picked up his plate helm and placed it on his head, fastening it with a leather strap under his black beard. The Barbute-style helm had a row of spikes starting at the top and ending at the warrior's forehead, and the rest of his blue and gray armor was likewise lined with rows of spikes. This particular ship, named the Prophecy, had left Stormwind Harbor several days ago and was currently housing nearly 30 Alliance combatants from all types of backgrounds. The Prophecy was primarily built using the highest quality Elwyn oak, and its sails flew proudly with a blue and gold lion emblem painted upon them. As the Prophecy was nearing its destination on the shores of Kalimdor, the squadron's leaders were making their final preparations within the captain's quarters.
Alexander and I will take point,
said the commander, Aldof Odinforge.
We will keep everyone on target
and ensure everyone moves as one cohesive unit. The tall and powerful human was one of the Alliance's greatest and most experienced paladins. His plate armor was silver colored with blue and gold trim, and his massive broadsword was similarly adorned.
Humph,
grunted a towering Worgen as a sign of acknowledgement of the commander's orders. The wolf-like humanoid stood with his arms folded, leaning against the wall, several yards behind Aldof. His name was Alexander Boltsworth, and his fur was dark gray, contrasting with his green eyes, which eerily glowed in the shadows. On his back was a hulking gray and silver-plated shield structured in the form of a wolf's head. On his hip hung a gladius sword with a howling wolf's image running through the middle of the blade, and both, as well as his armor, were adorned in the roses and symbols of his native Gilneas.
I need the rest of you to watch over our troops, continued Aldolf Odinforge. I'm counting on all of you to keep everyone alive to the best of your abilities.
Aye, responded the priest Sulos Highbeacon from under his white and gold robes as his eyes glowed with a dim light.
Zulana, added Aldolf, were you able to contact your brother? He would be a great boon to our forces if we are to maintain a foothold here after the coming battle.
Aldranis was always difficult to work with in life, responded the female Draenei, and now in his undeath, it has been nearly impossible to get through his thick skull. I also fear that the darkness that gives him so much power might be gaining the upper hand over his will. I truly don't know if we'll see my brother by our side anytime soon, or ever again. The Draenei was tall and slender, and had a light blue tone to her complexion. Her mail armor was adorned with purple crystals that occasionally sparked with energy, and in her hand she carried a mace and a shield covered in crystals as well.
I see,
said the commander as he turned his gaze back to the map on the table in front of him, and his face became stoic in quiet contemplation. The light will guide his path, said Lady Elizabeth Fairchild in a soft and gentle voice as she placed a hand on Zulana's shoulder. Elizabeth, like Commander Aldolf, was a paladin of the light. She carried a battle mace with a long shaft decorated in blue and gold trim, and her long red hair was tied in a ponytail behind her.
We will make do with what we have,
added the commander as he lifted his head back up, his brows furrowing with determination. The rest of the group nodded in agreement as they all regained their composure and readied themselves for the battle to come. The Alliance forces had now begun to gather on the Prophecy's upper deck as the ship was mere moments from reaching shore. Some of the vessel's occupants remained stoic and ready for battle as they looked upon the mountains and forests of Darkshore coming into focus. Others, largely the more inexperienced lot, were visibly nervous as the time for battle approached. But others, 2 mages to be exact, seemed to be oblivious to the current situation altogether.
Arcane is clearly the superior school, Vickers,
declared a teal-haired gnome with a thick mustache and beard as he shot his right index finger up and twirled it ever so slightly.
Nonsense, my dear Norik,
enthusiastically responded a second gnome as he jumped up and his dark blue pointed wizard hat also flew up a short distance and then fell back on his head.
The level of battlefield control that Frost offers is unparalleled,
continued Vickers as tiny icicles would fly off of his black beard every time he jumped in protest. Having grown up together, Norik Mithril and Vickers Wintersnap had been friends and rivals since childhood. Both powerful magi in their own right, Norik had specialized in the arcane school of magic, while Vickers had mastered frost magic. As with all gnomes, their diminutive size was oddly juxtaposed with their incredible power. Along with their magical might, this pair also had tempers and egos to match, and even in situations as dire as this one, they couldn't resist the urge to one-up each other.
Ha! Control, you say?
Exclaimed Norik while feigning a hearty chuckle.
Have you ever exerted the type of control that comes from keeping a polymorphed enemy as a pet for an entire month? I dare say, by the end of the ordeal, I had grown quite fond of that little sheep. I'd actually completely forgotten it was an orc to begin with. Preposterous!
Shouted Vic with disgust on his face as he clutched his chest with one of his tiny hands.
What kind of degenerate would do such a thing? I dare say it is precisely the act of delving too far into the school of arcane magic that would turn a gnome's brain into such rot.
Ahem! Loudly interrupted Commander Odinforge, who, along with his council, had now stepped onto the upper deck.
If you two would be so inclined as to join the rest of us in preparing for battle.
Aye, aye, Captain!
Responded the 2 gnomes in unison as they both saluted their leader by standing up straight, as tall as they possibly could, while bringing one of their extended hands to their brows. Aldolf nodded at the gnomes in gratitude for their cooperation and turned back to face the oncoming shore.
Champions of the Alliance,
began Commander Odinforge, while unfastening his weapon from its harness and then bringing it to his side.
The foul stench of these murdering horde thugs has plagued these sacred lands for far too long. Our Kaldorite brothers and sisters have suffered too long from this evil, but today it ends. Lift up your weapons with me, and together let's bring justice down on their heads. For the Alliance!
Some of the blue-clad soldiers used boats to reach shore, others used their extraordinary powers to allow their mounts to walk on the ocean's water, and others simply flew or jumped to their destination. But regardless of the method, the might of the Alliance was soon barreling down on the Horde forces.
Attack!
shouted Captain Odinforge as he charged forward atop his heavily armored divine steed. The captain quickly reached an orc warrior, who swung his colossal battle axe at the paladin. Odinforge blocked the orc's attack with his own weapon, and the two became gridlocked for a second, each using all of their strength to push the enemy back. A faint yellowish glow then began to emanate from the captain's eyes, which suddenly exploded into a blinding light. As the orc was momentarily disoriented, Captain Odinforge raised his massive blade and brought it crashing down on the enemy's skull. The orc's head was split in two as his lifeless body fell back onto his horde brethren. As the Horde forces scrambled to defend themselves from Captain Odinforge's advance, Yolov Stonecore leapt through the air, slamming his weapon down on a Forsaken, breaking through the Horde warrior's own weapon. The undead fell to his knees, writhing from the massive wound inflicted on his upper torso. The dwarf then lifted his blade once more and struck with such force that his enemy was cut in two. Several Horde soldiers closed in on the warrior, and he was soon swarmed by attackers from all directions. Before he was overwhelmed though, Alexander Boltsworth leapt in and slammed his shield against another Forsaken soldier's head. The undead's body hit the floor with a massive thud, and the Gilnean continued his attack, slicing across another enemy's face with his saber before pinning a third to the ground and ripping out its neck with one monstrous bite.
Die, Horde scum!
Exploded the Worgen warrior, lifting his head up, revealing his blood-stained fangs to his enemies. In retaliation, several Horde shamans charged their hands with the very power of the storms and unleashed it in the direction of the Alliance troops. The Worgen warrior stepped in front of the devastating attacks, blocking most of them with his shield, but he was soon overwhelmed with the sheer magnitude of raw elemental energy and was launched back into the Alliance forces. Slumped over and heavily breathing, the Gilnean's body smoked and his fur burnt from the immense electrical charge he was hit with. As Alexander struggled to recover though, Lady Elizabeth Fairchild rushed to his side and placed a hand on his shoulder. As she lifted her battle hammer to the skies, a flash of light engulfed the heavily injured Gilnean. When the light dissipated, the Worgen opened his eyes with renewed vigor, his burns and wounds now completely healed.
Much obliged, Lady Elizabeth,
said the recuperated Worgen, to which the paladin simply nodded and smiled. Now it's my turn, said Zulana, as electrical charges began to come down from the skies and wrap around her hands. The elemental power was so great that the hairs on those around began to stand on end. Several of the Horde shamans began to run in fear of the imminent attack, but they were not fast enough to escape. The lightning strike was so powerful that additional bolts came down from the clouds and struck other opponents. Draydara Wildhunt let loose a few yards away as she brutally slashed an enemy's arm off, and as more Alliance soldiers advanced, those of the Horde began to fall one after another. The battle for Darkshore had just commenced, and Sylvanas' forces had tasted just but a fraction of the Alliance's wrath. Over the following hours, the Horde would truly gain an understanding of the fury they had unleashed upon themselves. Traveling through Dustwallow Marsh's swamp-covered terrain and enduring its hot and humid climate was less than ideal for anyone, but these were not ideal conditions. This group of Horde deserters knew the dangers that closely followed, so if necessary, they were more than willing to tolerate the ravenous insects that swarmed them, the bloodthirsty crocodiles that lay in wait all around, and all the other threats that this treacherous swamp offered. The group was mainly comprised of Forsaken and Cinderay civilian non-combatants, including children and elderly individuals. The group was led by Artorius Belnock, a renowned undead hunter known by some as the Ghost Ranger, and the powerful blood elf mage Scion Skyblaze. Although the sun had just set, they had no plans of making camp and settling for the night, as their contact was waiting for them on the sandy ocean shores, just a couple of small muddy lakes away. This contact had already received half of the payment, 10,000 gold coins, and after safely transporting this group of runaways to the Eastern Kingdoms, he was to receive the other half of the payment. Suddenly, Artorius' mastiff companion, a large and powerful hound named Colonel, stopped and barked at some of the mangroves to the group's left flank. The Ghost Ranger looked down at the mastiff, then at the mangroves, but did not wonder to himself what his dog was barking at. The hunter had a small piece of cloth in his pocket. He had collected this object long ago in anticipation of this very situation. He had trained the hound to be exceptionally sensitive to its scent, the scent of Dagon Dreadblade.
Scion, everyone, group up as we practiced. Cover each other's backs,
shouted Artorius as he launched the flare up above his group, illuminating the area surrounding them. "What is it, Artorias?" asked Scion, his hands now slowly building up torrents of fire that danced and wrapped around the Blood Elf's arms.
He's here,
responded the hunter, while warily eyeing the surrounding areas. Artorias and Dagon had often been on the same side, fighting for the safety of the Forsaken and for the glory of the Horde. But given the rogue's evil nature and penchant for cruelty and malice, the hunter knew that it was highly likely that one day they would face each other as enemies.
"I can accept the cowardly Blood Elf's betrayal,"
spoke a voice from behind an old, withering tree a few yards away.
"but your abandonment is especially heinous, Artorias. I will enjoy this more than you can imagine, ghost stranger,"
finished Dagon as he stepped out into view. "Your queen has betrayed you," spoke up Scion, the Cinderace now completely engulfed in flames. "Leave us in peace or face my wrath."
"He's right, Dagon,"
interjected Artorias before anyone escalated the situation further, although he realized that violence was all but inevitable at this point.
"Our Dark Lady no longer fights for our people. She has become unhinged and will only lead us to our destruction. The only ones to face destruction today will be you and your lot," responded Dagon. "You treacherous wretches."
As the rogue said those final words, Malixia appeared behind one of the caravan's makeshift warriors, a lightly armored blood elf holding a farming scythe, and ripped through the Cinderace's torso. Scion and Artorias turned to see the commotion as more rogues emerged from the surrounding trees and shrubs and began to slaughter the caravan's travelers. As Scion began to engage the assassins, Artorias quickly turned back towards Dagon, only to find that the rogue had vanished.
"Damn,"
said the hunter under his breath as he drew his bow and fired an arrow at an assailant's head. The projectile broke through the target's skull, and the rogue promptly dropped dead to the ground. "Feel the heat of my fury, scoundrels!" shouted Scion as he struck several assassins with powerful fireballs that launched the attackers back in flames. "Shush, you fool! Ha!" said Malixia as she attempted to strike the mage from behind, but was quickly swatted away by Scion's blazing barrier. The rogue was forced to dive into the swamp's muddy waters in order to extinguish the flames scattered across her garments.
"Bleed, traitors!"
jeered Zuko as he jumped down from a tree and slammed his mace into an undead deserter's back. The clown followed up with his sword as he decapitated his victim. But immediately after, Colonel lunged at Zuko and clamped down on his arm. The rogue screamed in pain as the mastiff pulled until ripping his arm off.
"Blasted dog!"
protested Dagon as he appeared behind the hound and sliced open its shoulder.
"Colonel!"
yelled Artorias as his companion yelped in pain. The hunter quickly nocked another arrow and fired it at Dagon, striking the rogue's shoulder. "You've overestimated your strength, maggot," said Scion as he launched the pyroblast at Dagon, who had just removed the arrow from his shoulder. Dreadblade managed to dive for safety, but the fiery attack struck a different rogue who was instantly ignited. Dagon quickly hid behind a tree before the mage could cast another spell in his direction. "You cannot hide, scoundrel," continued Scion as he caused the very tree to combust into a pillar of fire. All of the surrounding rogues were engulfed in flames, but Dagon was nowhere in sight.
"We have them on the run, Scion,"
said Artorias as another rogue was caught in his steel trap. The assailant wailed in pain as the serrated blades dug deeper into his calf muscle.
"I'll put you out of your misery,"
whispered the hunter under his breath as he drove a killing shot into the rogue's chest, penetrating his heart.
"We'll see about that,"
thought Dagon as he placed one of his highly poisoned daggers into Zuko's dismembered arm, tightly wrapping the lifeless limb's fingers around the weapon's handle.
"I just need you to hold this tightly for a couple of seconds."
"Taste my phoenix flames, villains," said Scion as he summoned a magnificent flame-engulfed bird which flew at a different group of rogues, scorching one, then jumping to several others and sending them to a fiery grave.
"Catch this, mage,"
whispered Dagon to himself as he threw Zuko's arm at Scion. "What trickery is this?" said the mage as he quickly blasted the airborne limb back with a fire spell. Due to the change in momentum, the blade was released by the lifeless arm and continued on its trajectory, inserting itself into the Blood Elf's chest.
"Here, Scion,"
said Artorias as he attempted to quickly reach his companion's side.
"I'll help." "Ha! Not so fast!"
exclaimed Zuko while intercepting the hunter and slashing with his sword. Artorias blocked the attack and disengaged to a safe distance, but was soon struck by a different opponent.
"Arr!"
The hunter grimaced in pain as a recovered Malixia emerged from the shadows and drove her dagger into his ribs. "You'll need more than this dagger to stop me," said Scion while removing the weapon and rising to his feet. "Your cruelty and... What is this?" The Blood Elf suddenly felt dizzy and unable to conjure any spells. The mage then looked down at Dagon's blade, still dripping with both his own blood and the rogue's vile poisons, and he knew his end was nigh.
Your luck has run out, mage,
said Dagon as he lunged at Scion and stabbed him with both daggers. Several other rogues joined in on the melee and struck the Cinderace several more times.
Now you die,
jeered Zuko as he sliced at the mage's neck, ending his life. The rest of the caravan was now slaughtered, and only Artorius Belknok was left, struggling to stand as he leaned on a sturdy tree with one hand. The hunter had attempted to continue fighting, but without Scion's help, he had become easy prey for Melixia and the remaining rogues.
This will not end well for our people,
said Artorius, struggling with each word he spoke. Laughed Dagon as he slowly approached the hunter.
You don't have to worry about that now, traitor,
said the rogue as he stood in front of his fellow Forsaken, maintaining eye contact with Artorius.
Your own death ends here in a watery, putrid grave,
finished Dagon, then slicing at the hunter's torso, nearly cutting him in half. Artorius fell back into the water, the glow in his eyes faded, and his limp body slowly floated away.
Think Artorius is faking it, Dagon?
asked Melixia from behind.
Should we get Zuko to jump in the water and retrieve his body, just in case?
No, responded Dagon, to which Zuko breathed a sigh of relief as he had just retrieved his dismembered arm and was now holding it at his side. The clown didn't want to lose it again, this time to a hungry crocodile.
Even if he is still alive, said Dagon, the poisons I used will ensure he has a slow and painful death. A fitting end for a treacherous coward. We need to get patched up and regroup,
he continued as he looked to the western mountains.
There are still more traitors in need of retribution out there.